Welcome to today's story of power, justice, and redemption. When billionaire Nicole Bennett walks into the luxurious Crestview Hotel, she's met with blatant disrespect by the arrogant manager, Max Peterson. What he doesn't know is that Nicole holds the power to change his life forever. What starts as an insult soon turns into a high-stakes game of strategy and survival as Nicole sets out to bring Max down and transform the very industry he thrives in. But will her pursuit of justice go too far? And can Max redeem himself before it's too late? Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's dive in! The low hum of the city faded into the background as Nicole Bennett watched the world pass by through the tinted windows of her sleek, black luxury sedan. The comforting leather seats and the soft hum of the car's engine offered her a rare moment of peace amid the endless demands of her life. She glanced at her phone, noting the steady stream of emails and messages that required her attention, but for now, she let them be. Today was about more than work. It was about strategy. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the towering buildings that lined the streets of Midtown. Nicole was on her way to the Crestview Hotel, one of the most exclusive and long-standing establishments in the city. Known for catering to the wealthy elite, it was the kind of place she frequented often in her line of work, though its reputation for exclusivity had always made her wary. Today, however, she wasn't there for leisure or a business deal. She had a personal reason for checking in. She glanced at the man behind the wheel, Marcus Green, her loyal driver for over a decade. He was more than just an employee. He was someone she trusted deeply, a companion through many of the ups and downs of her life. "Miss Bennett will be arriving at the Crestview shortly," Marcus said, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "Thank you, Marcus," Nicole replied, her voice steady. She adjusted the sleek fabric of her tailored emerald blazer, smoothing out the lines as her fingers grazed over the pearl necklace resting at her collarbone. Nicole had always been meticulous about her appearance, not out of vanity, but because she knew the power it commanded in the business world. She had built her empire from nothing, starting with a single small business and turning it into a multinational conglomerate. Every step of the way, people had underestimated her. Because she was a woman, because she was black, because she didn't come from money. But Nicole had learned to use those assumptions to her advantage, rising higher and proving everyone wrong in the process. As they approached the Crestview, Nicole's eyes drifted to the grand facade of the hotel. It was an imposing structure, its stone exterior gleaming in the afternoon light, giving it an air of old-world luxury. The kind of place that was dripping in tradition, yet rigid in its unspoken rules about who truly belonged within its walls. Nicole's thoughts wandered back to her childhood. The small apartment she had shared with her parents was a far cry from the luxury she now inhabited. Her mother had worked long shifts as a nurse, and her father had labored in a factory, doing everything he could to make ends meet. They had instilled in her the values of hard work and perseverance. But it wasn't until their tragic deaths in a car accident when Nicole was only 19 that she truly understood the depth of sacrifice. Losing them had fueled her drive to succeed. She had poured her grief into her studies and her work, building something out of the ashes of her old life. Even now, with all her wealth and success, Nicole never forgot where she came from. She carried those memories with her as both a reminder and a motivator, especially when she faced people like Max Peterson. The car slowed to a stop in front of the Crestview's grand entrance, where a doorman, dressed in an immaculate uniform, stepped forward to open the car door. Nicole gathered her belongings and stepped out, the sound of her heels clicking softly against the polished marble sidewalk. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome to the Crestview," the doorman greeted her with a professional smile, though Nicole could see the hint of curiosity in his eyes. It wasn't often someone like her, a black woman, arrived at a place like this without attracting a few glances. "Thank you," Nicole replied warmly, meeting his gaze with calm confidence. As Marcus retrieved her small overnight bag from the trunk, Nicole took a moment to admire the hotel's exterior. The building was imposing, its architecture a mix of classic grandeur and modern opulence. The large glass windows reflected the fading sunlight, while inside, she could see the faint glow of chandeliers casting soft light over the elegant lobby. Marcus handed her the bag, but Nicole waved him off gently. "I've got it." "Thank you, Marcus." He smiled, knowing her well enough to understand that she preferred to carry her own things, a habit she had kept from her early days when every penny mattered, and she couldn't afford anyone to help her. "Of course, Miss Bennet. I'll be just a phone call away if you need anything." With that, Nicole made her way into the lobby, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The soft lighting, the polished marble floors, and the rich gold accents gave the place an air of exclusivity. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with expensive perfumes as hotel guests, well-dressed, mostly white, moved about the space, some with a quick glance in her direction before returning to their conversations. Nicole had long since stopped letting those stares affect her. She was used to it. People trying to place her, trying to understand how someone who looked like her could belong in such a place. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who not only belonged, but owned the very ground she walked on. As she approached the check-in desk, she was greeted by a young woman with a bright smile. Her name tag reads Sarah. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennet." "Welcome to the Crestview," Sarah said, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. "We have you in our presidential suite on the top floor, with a full view of the city skyline." "Thank you," Nicole replied, her tone professional but friendly. She glanced around the lobby again, her eyes catching a few lingering stares from the other guests. It wasn't anything overt, just a flicker of surprise followed by quick, polite smiles. But Nicole noticed. She always noticed. Sarah handed her the room key, her smile never wavering. "If there's anything you need during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask." "I appreciate that," Nicole said. "I think I'll grab a quick bite to eat before heading up to my room." "How's the restaurant?" Sarah's expression brightened. "It's one of the best in the city, if I do say so myself. I can have someone show you to your table if you'd like." Nicole nodded, already feeling the weariness of the long day starting to settle into her bones. "That sounds perfect." As Nicole made her way across the lobby toward the restaurant, she couldn't help but notice the shift in atmosphere as she approached the entrance. The polished wooden doors stood open, revealing a space of elegance and refinement. Soft lighting, plush velvet seating, and tables adorned with pristine white linens and flickering candles. But it wasn't the ambiance that caught Nicole's attention. It was the man standing at the entrance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, and his suit impeccably tailored. His name tag read Max Peterson, Hotel Manager. At first, Max wore the same polite, professional smile he likely offered to every guest. But as his eyes fell on Nicole, something shifted. The smile faltered, just for a second, but enough for Nicole to notice. His eyes swept over her, lingering on her face, and then down to her attire, as if he were making a silent calculation about who she was and whether she belonged there. Nicole's steps didn't falter. She had seen that look 1,000 times before. Too many people in her life had made those same judgments, and she wasn't about to let one more person think they could dismiss her based on appearances. Max cleared his throat, his expression tightening slightly as she approached the podium. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm afraid we're fully booked for tonight," he said, his voice polite but distant. Nicole raised an eyebrow, glancing past him into the restaurant where several empty tables were visible. "Really? Fully booked?" Max's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes flicking to the tables she had spotted. "Yes, I'm afraid so," he replied, his tone growing more formal. "We have a very high demand here at the Crestview. Perhaps the cafe down the street would be more suitable for you." There it was, the subtle insult masked under the guise of professionalism, but clear as day to Nicole. She had dealt with this kind of behavior her entire life. The unspoken assumption that she didn't belong, that she wasn't part of the right crowd. Nicole's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of cold anger in her eyes. "I'm a guest at this hotel," she said, her voice steady. "I was under the impression that hotel guests had priority seating." Max hesitated, his smile becoming tighter, more forced. While that's typically the case, we're simply unable to accommodate you tonight. I apologize for any inconvenience. Nicole crossed her arms, standing her ground. You don't seem to be at capacity. I see several empty tables. Max's frustration began to show as his professional veneer cracked slightly. Ma'am, he said, his tone taking on a more condescending edge. We have a certain standard here. We can't accommodate everyone who walks in off the street. The air in the lobby seemed to shift, the tension rising as nearby staff members and a few guests glanced toward the interaction. There was a subtle silence, like the collective inhale of those watching from the periphery. Nicole's expression didn't change, but inside, the simmering anger had grown. I'm not just anyone off the street, Mr. Peterson. I have a reservation at this hotel, and I have every right to dine here. Max's face flushed, his frustration spilling over. You may have a reservation, but that doesn't mean you can disrupt the way I run my establishment. I think it would be best if you found somewhere else to eat. Nicole stared at him, feeling the weight of the eyes around them. She had given him every chance to change his approach, to treat her with the respect she deserved, but instead, he had chosen to double down. It was clear that this wasn't just about reservations or seating, it was about his prejudice, about the way he viewed her and the assumptions he had made the moment she stepped through the door. I'm not going anywhere, Nicole said firmly, her voice lowering but still steady. You can either seat me now, or I'll be speaking with the hotel's higher management about this situation. Max's face twisted into a scowl, and without another word, he pulled out his phone. Fine, he snapped. If you won't leave, I'll have the authorities escort you out. He dialed quickly, turning his back slightly to Nicole as he spoke into the phone. Yes, this is Max Peterson at the Crestview Hotel. I have a guest here causing a disturbance, refusing to leave. I'd like an officer to come down and handle the situation. Nicole stood her ground, her arms crossed over her chest as she waited. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she knew that the situation would work in her favor soon enough. Max was digging his own grave, and he didn't even realize it. Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the quiet evening air. Guests in the lobby shifted uncomfortably, some whispering to one another as they watched the scene unfold. Nicole stood with her arms still crossed, her posture relaxed, but her eyes focused on Max. He hadn't backed down, and now he was about to face the consequences of his own arrogance. The glass doors of the hotel slid open, and two uniformed police officers entered the lobby, their eyes scanning the room before locking onto Max and Nicole. One of them, a younger officer with kind eyes, stepped forward first, his expression neutral as he approached the hotel manager. Mr. Peterson? The officer asked, his voice steady. You called about a disturbance? Max nodded quickly, his tone sharp. Yes, that's correct. This woman refuses to leave my restaurant. She's causing a scene and disrupting my business. The officer turned his attention to Nicole, and for a moment there was silence. His eyes widened slightly as recognition flickered across his face. Miss Bennett? He asked, his tone shifting from professional to surprised. Nicole raised an eyebrow. That's right. The officer's expression softened, a hint of respect in his eyes. I didn't realize? My son's school received that incredible grant from your foundation last year. It changed everything for their program. Max's face paled instantly, the smug arrogance draining away as realization dawned on him. He had just called the police on one of the most influential philanthropists in the country, a woman who had spent years quietly using her wealth and power to uplift communities, fund education programs, and support social justice initiatives. The older officer, catching on, stepped forward, his posture more respectful. Miss Bennett, I'm terribly sorry for any inconvenience. We had no idea it was you. Max stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process what was happening. The color drained from his face as he realized the gravity of his mistake. He had thought he was in control, that he could brush Nicole aside as though she didn't belong. But now he stood before her, utterly powerless. Is this the woman you were complaining about, Mr. Peterson? The younger officer asked, his tone laced with disbelief. Max stammered, unable to find the words. I didn't know. I didn't realize. You didn't bother to ask, Nicole said, her voice calm but cutting. You assumed I didn't belong here. You treated me with disrespect and condescension. Max's eyes flicked nervously between Nicole and the officers, his hands trembling slightly as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. I think we're done here, Nicole said, turning to the officers. Thank you for your time. The officers nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, and after a few moments, they made their way out of the lobby, leaving Max standing there in stunned silence. As the glass doors of the hotel slid shut behind the officers, the weight of the moment settled over the lobby like a thick fog. The guests who had been watching the confrontation quickly looked away, murmuring among themselves, while the staff stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Max Peterson stood in the center of it all, his face ashen, his mind reeling from the humiliation. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating Nicole Bennett, of treating her as though she didn't belong, when in reality, she had more power and influence than he could ever imagine. Nicole took a step closer to Max, her eyes locking onto his as she spoke in a low, controlled voice. You thought you could humiliate me. You thought you could dismiss me as though I didn't matter. But you made one crucial mistake, Mr. Peterson. You assumed I was someone you could push around. Max swallowed hard, his throat dry. Miss Bennett, I don't care for your excuses, Nicole interrupted, her voice cold but calm. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I'll be making sure the owners of this hotel know about your behavior. Max's heart sank. He knew what that meant. His career, his reputation. It was all hanging by a thread now, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I'm leaving now, Nicole said, her tone sharp. But don't think for a second that this is over. With that, Nicole turned on her heel, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor as she made her way toward the exit. The air in the lobby seemed to hold its breath as she passed, the silence heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Max stood there, frozen, his mind racing as the reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had thought he was untouchable, that his position of power at the Crestview gave him the right to treat people however he wanted. But now he realized how wrong he had been. As Nicole stepped outside into the cool evening air, Marcus was waiting for her by the car. He opened the door for her, his expression neutral, though she could see the concern in his eyes. Everything all right, Miss Bennett? He asked as she settled into the back seat. Nicole gave a small nod, her face calm but thoughtful. It will be. Marcus glanced at her through the rearview mirror, sensing the tension in her voice. You handled that with grace. But I know you, Miss Bennett. You don't let things like this slide. Nicole's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. No, I don't. And I won't. She looked out the window as the car pulled away from the Crestview, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors as they drove through the streets. Her mind was already working, planning her next move. This wasn't just about Max Peterson. It was about something bigger, something more important. Marcus glanced back at her once more, his voice quiet but respectful. So, what happens next? Nicole leaned back against the seat, her eyes narrowing slightly as her fingers absent-mindedly played with the pearls around her neck. Next, she said softly, her voice laced with quiet determination, we make sure people like Max Peterson never get to treat anyone like that again. The gentle hum of the city faded into the background as Nicole leaned back in her office chair, her gaze drifting to the large windows that overlooked the skyline. It was a breathtaking view, one that symbolized the heights she had reached in her career. But her thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the events from the Crestview over and over in her mind. Max Peterson's sneer, his condescending tone, the thinly veiled racism behind his polite facade. It was all too familiar. She had seen it countless times before, in boardrooms, at business meetings, even at social events where she had to fight just to be recognized for her accomplishments instead of her appearance. But what gnawed at Nicole wasn't just the injustice of that single moment. It was the larger pattern it represented, the invisible barriers that still existed in places like the Crestview, where people like Max Peterson were allowed to judge and discriminate without consequences. It wasn't just about her, it was about everyone who had been quietly dismissed, overlooked, and pushed aside because they didn't fit the right image. Nicole had never forgotten what it was like to be on the outside, looking in. The memories of her childhood in the tiny apartment with her parents were still vivid in her mind. Her mother had been a nurse, working long hours to provide for the family, while her father had taken on back-breaking shifts at the factory just to make sure they could get by. They had taught her the value of hard work, resilience, and dignity, lessons that had carried her through some of the darkest moments of her life. When her parents died in that car accident, Nicole had been devastated. She had been 19, just a college student with dreams of success, and suddenly, she was left alone to figure out how to make those dreams a reality. She had grieved, but more than that, she had fought. Nicole had worked 3 jobs to put herself through college: waitressing, tutoring, even cleaning offices late at night when the city was asleep. Every success had been hard-earned, every step forward's a battle. And yet, even now, standing at the top of her field, Nicole knew that there were people like Max who still believed she didn't belong. People who couldn't see beyond their own narrow definitions of success and worth. As she sat in her office, the weight of those memories pressing down on her, Nicole decided. This wasn't going to be just another moment of silent indignation. She wasn't going to let Max Peterson get away with treating her, or anyone else, as though they were less than him. She was going to act, and when she acted, she would do it with precision and purpose. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. Nicole glanced at the screen. Sarah Johnson, her assistant, was calling. "Nicole?" Sarah's voice came through the line, warm but professional. "Ethan's on his way over to meet with you. He said it's urgent." Nicole nodded to herself. Ethan Harris, her lawyer, had been by her side for years, helping her navigate the complex world of business acquisitions and legal strategy. If anyone could help her with what she had in mind, it was him. "Good," Nicole replied. "I've got a few things I need to discuss with him." "And one more thing," Sarah added, her tone shifting slightly. "I reached out to Jason Walker, like you asked. He's available for a meeting tomorrow morning." Nicole smiled faintly. Jason Walker, a name she had been hearing more and more lately. He had been a rising star in the hotel management world, running one of the top hotels in the city, until he had been pushed out due to discriminatory practices from the owners. His story had stuck with her. A talented, hard-working black man who had been sidelined simply because he didn't fit the right image. "Perfect," Nicole said. "Set it up." Later that afternoon, Ethan Harris entered Nicole's office. His sharp, dark suit and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of precision and control, qualities that had made him one of the most respected lawyers in the city. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other, his expression focused as he took a seat across from Nicole's desk. "Nicole," Ethan began, his voice steady, "Sarah mentioned that you wanted to talk about something big. What's going on?" Nicole leaned forward, her elbows resting on the desk as she spoke. "It's about the Crestview," she said, her tone measured. "More specifically about Max Peterson." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What did he do?" Nicole's lips pressed into a thin line. "He treated me like I didn't belong there," she said, her voice calm, but filled with a quiet intensity. "He looked at me, and he saw someone who didn't deserve to be in his space. And when I called him out on it, he doubled down. He called the police, Ethan. He thought he could humiliate me." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tightening. "Sounds like a classic case of prejudice and arrogance." "Exactly," Nicole said. "And I'm not going to let it slide. I want to take him down." Ethan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as he considered her words. "You want to sue him?" Nicole shook her head. "No. A lawsuit would just give him a chance to spin the story. I want to hurt him where it counts, in his business. I want to acquire every hotel on the same street as the Crestview, turn them into something better, and drive him out of business." Ethan's eyes widened slightly, clearly impressed by her boldness. Ambitious, he said, but it's also risky. Buying up that many properties, even for you, would be a significant investment. I'm willing to make the investment, Nicole said firmly. This isn't just about one man. It's about sending a message. Max Peterson represents everything that's wrong with this industry. The elitism, the casual racism. The way people like him think they can decide who belongs and who doesn't. I want to change that. Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You know this is going to ruffle some feathers, right? The hospitality industry has a lot of people like Max. They're not going to like what you're doing. Nicole smiled faintly. Let them ruffle. I'm not afraid of a fight. Ethan nodded, clearly impressed by her resolve. All right, he said, pulling out his tablet. I'll start looking into the properties around the Crestview. We'll need to move quickly if you want to get ahead of him. Good, Nicole replied. And one more thing. I want this done quietly. Max can't know I'm behind the acquisitions until it's too late. Ethan grinned slightly, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a challenge. I'll make sure of it. As Ethan began making notes on his tablet, Nicole felt a surge of determination. This was more than just a business move, it was a statement. She was going to take on people like Max, and she was going to win. The next morning, Nicole sat in her office, reviewing the latest updates from Ethan. He had already begun preliminary research on the hotels surrounding the Crestview, and things were moving faster than she had anticipated. She was pleased. Everything was falling into place. Just as she finished reading through the documents, there was a soft knock on the door. Sarah stepped in, her tablet tucked under her arm. Jason Walker is here to see you, she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Send him in, Nicole replied, standing up and walking over to the large window that overlooked the city. She needed a moment to gather her thoughts before the meeting. When the door opened again, Jason Walker stepped into the office. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of quiet confidence that was tempered by the weight of what he had been through. His eyes, dark and sharp, flicked around the room before landing on Nicole. Miss Bennett, Jason said, extending a hand. It's an honor to meet you. Please, call me Nicole, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. I've heard a lot about you, Jason. Jason smiled faintly, though there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Good things, I hope. Nicole gestured for him to take a seat, and they both sat down across from each other. For a moment, there was silence as Nicole studied him, trying to get a sense of who he was beneath the surface. You were one of the best hotel managers in the city, Nicole said finally, her tone measured. But I also know you were forced out because of discrimination. Jason's expression hardened slightly, though he kept his voice steady. That's right. The owners didn't like the idea of a black man running one of their most prestigious hotels. They made sure I knew it. Nicole nodded, her gaze steady. That's why I wanted to meet with you. I'm about to acquire several hotels on the same street as the Crestview. I need someone with your experience and your vision to help me turn them into something more than just luxury properties. I want to create places where people, all people, feel welcome and respected. Jason blinked, clearly taken aback. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Nicole said, leaning forward slightly. I need someone who understands the industry, but more importantly, I need someone who understands what's at stake. You've lived through what we're fighting against. I want you to help me change the game. Jason was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching Nicole's face for any sign of insincerity. But all he found was conviction. I've been burned before, Jason said finally, his voice low. People like me, we don't always get the second chances we deserve. Nicole nodded. I know, but I'm not offering you this because of pity or charity. I'm offering it to you because you're the best at what you do. And I believe we can make something incredible together. Jason's hesitation faded, replaced by a quiet determination. All right, he said, his voice stronger now. I'm in. Nicole smiled, feeling the weight of her plan finally coming together. With Jason by her side, she knew they were going to do more than just compete with Max Peterson. They were going to redefine what it meant to succeed in this industry. Over the next several weeks, Nicole and her team moved quickly, with Ethan handling the legal aspects of the acquisitions and Jason working on the operational side. They were able to quietly purchase several of the hotels surrounding the Crestview without drawing too much attention. Each deal was negotiated smoothly, and Nicole made sure to offer fair prices that the owners couldn't refuse. Once the acquisitions were complete, Nicole put the next phase of her plan into motion: aggressive price reductions. By offering high-quality rooms at lower rates, she would lure away Max Peterson's clientele, leaving the Crestview struggling to compete. The effects were immediate. Within days, the newly acquired hotels saw a surge in bookings, while the Crestview began to experience a noticeable drop in occupancy. Guests who had once frequented Max's hotel were now choosing to stay at Nicole's properties, enticed by the combination of luxury and affordability. Max, of course, noticed the shift. At first, he dismissed it as a temporary promotion or a seasonal fluctuation. But as the weeks went by and his own hotel remained eerily quiet, he couldn't ignore the reality any longer. His competitors were outpricing him, and he couldn't match their rates without taking a significant financial hit. Behind closed doors, Nicole watched the situation unfold with quiet satisfaction. Max had no idea who was behind the sudden success of the neighboring hotels, and she intended to keep it that way, at least for now. As the Crestview's business began to falter, Max grew increasingly desperate. He lowered his prices slightly, hoping to draw back some of his regular customers. But it wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. His reputation, once untouchable, was beginning to crack, and his pride wouldn't let him admit that he was losing. For Nicole, it was only the beginning. Max Peterson thought he was invincible, but she knew better. And soon, he would learn just how wrong he had been. The soft light of the early morning filtered through the grand windows of the Crestview Hotel, casting long shadows across the once bustling lobby. But instead of the usual hum of activity that Max Peterson was accustomed to, the air was thick with an eerie silence. The empty chairs, the vacant reception desk, the quiet phone lines, it was all a far cry from the lively energy the hotel had once known. Max stood behind the reception desk, his eyes scanning the reservation screen. Fewer and fewer guests had been booking rooms over the past few weeks, and now, staring at the near-empty calendar, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. His hotel, the pride of his family for generations, was in serious trouble. He had tried everything to reverse the downward spiral. He'd run promotions, sent out special offers to his loyal customers, even slashed room prices in a desperate attempt to attract new guests. But none of it had worked. No matter what he did, the other hotels on the street were beating him, offering lower prices and better services. Max clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling over. How had this happened? He had built the Crestview into one of the most prestigious hotels in the city, a place where the wealthy and powerful gathered. But now, those same guests were choosing to stay elsewhere, and Max had no idea why. In his heart, Max knew that something larger was at play. The sudden rise of the other hotels, the way they had undercut his prices so effectively, it felt too calculated, too precise to be a coincidence. Someone was behind this. But who? And why? As he paced the empty lobby, Max's thoughts turned to Nicole Bennett. The memory of their confrontation burned in his mind. She had been calm, composed, even after he had dismissed her. She had stood there, confident in her right to be treated as an equal. And then, when the police had arrived, it had been her who walked away with her head held high, while he had been left to fumble through excuses. Could she be behind this? The thought gnawed at him, but he quickly brushed it aside. Nicole Bennett was a businesswoman, a billionaire, yes, but what interest would she have in sabotaging his hotel? No, it couldn't be her. It had to be someone else, someone who had a personal vendetta against him. But as the days passed, and the bookings continued to dwindle, Max couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing exactly how to handle his business. But now, standing in the empty lobby of his failing hotel, Max felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Across the street, in the newly renovated offices of the Horizon, the former Crestview competitor now under Nicole's control, Things were running smoothly. Bookings were up, reviews were glowing, and the hotel had quickly become one of the top-rated destinations in the city. Nicole should have been celebrating, but instead, she found herself staring out the large windows of her office, a knot of uncertainty tightening in her chest. For weeks, Nicole had watched as Max Peterson's business slowly crumbled under the weight of her plan. Her hotels had undercut his prices, offered better amenities, and drawn away his customers. She had hit him where it hurt most, in his pride and his wallet. It was exactly what she had wanted from the start. So why did it feel so hollow now? Miss Bennett? Sarah Johnson's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Her assistant stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, her brow furrowed with concern. You've been staring out that window for a while. Everything all right? Nicole gave a small sigh, running a hand through her hair. I don't know, Sarah, she admitted, her voice unusually soft. I've been thinking about all of this, about what we're doing. Sarah stepped inside, setting her tablet down on the desk. What do you mean? You've built something incredible here. The hotels are thriving. Max Peterson is finally facing the consequences of his actions. Nicole nodded slowly, but the doubt still lingered. That's just it. I wanted him to face the consequences, yes, but I can't help but wonder if I've gone too far. I mean, look at him. His business is falling apart. He's losing everything. Am I really doing this for the right reasons? Or is this just revenge? Sarah sat down across from her, her expression thoughtful. You're not doing this out of revenge, Nicole. You're doing this because you believe in something bigger. Max Peterson treated you, and who knows how many others, with disrespect. He made assumptions about you based on your appearance, your background. You didn't destroy his business. His own behavior did that. Nicole leaned back in her chair, her gaze still distant. But I helped it along, didn't I? I saw the opportunity, and I took it. Sarah tilted her head, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe. But ask yourself this. If it weren't Max Peterson, if it were someone else running that hotel, would you have still bought the properties? Would you still have wanted to create something better? Nicole thought about that for a long moment. She knew the answer. Yes, she would have. Because for her, this had always been about more than just one man. It had been about changing the way things were done in an industry that had long been dominated by people like Max Peterson. People who thought they could decide who belonged and who didn't. But knowing that didn't make the doubt go away entirely. She had never wanted to become someone who used her power to crush others. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to become someone driven by vengeance. I just need to be sure, Nicole said softly. I need to be sure that I'm doing this for the right reasons. Sarah smiled warmly. You've always done things for the right reasons. That's what makes you different. Don't doubt yourself now. Nicole gave her a grateful nod, but as Sarah left the room, the knot of uncertainty in her chest remained. She knew that power could corrupt, even the best intentions, and she had to be careful. She didn't want to lose herself in the process of winning this fight. The decline of the Crestview continued, and with each passing day, Max felt the walls closing in around him. His staff had begun to notice the changes. Fewer guests, cut hours, and whispers about layoffs. The hotel, once a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, had become a ghost of its former self. One evening, after a particularly bad day of cancellations, Max sat alone in his office, staring at the financial reports spread out before him. The numbers were devastating. His hotel was losing money faster than he could keep up with. He had already dipped into his personal savings just to cover the payroll, and now even that was running dry. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. His heart felt heavy with regret and frustration. How had it come to this? How had he gone from being the top hotelier in the city to sitting in an empty office, watching his business crumble? His phone buzzed on the desk, but Max didn't bother to check it. He knew it was another call from his accountant, or one of the creditors he had been trying to avoid. The hotel was on the brink of financial collapse, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The knock on the door startled him, and Max looked up to see Linda, his senior staff member, standing in the doorway. She had been with him for years, loyal, hardworking, but even she looked tired now, the stress of the situation etched into the lines of her face. "Mr. Peterson," Linda began hesitantly, her voice soft. "We need to talk about the staff. Some of them haven't been paid in weeks." Max felt a surge of guilt, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "I'm doing everything I can," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Linda stepped inside, her eyes filled with concern. "I know you are, but they have families to take care of. They can't wait much longer." Max nodded, though he didn't have an answer for her. He had always prided himself on taking care of his employees, on running a business where people felt valued. But now, standing on the edge of ruin, he could barely keep the lights on, let alone pay his staff. After Linda left, Max leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. He had spent his life building this hotel, pouring everything he had into making it a success. But now, it was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For the first time in his life, Max felt truly powerless. The soft chime of Nicole's phone interrupted the quiet hum of her office. She glanced down at the screen. Ethan Harris. Nicole reached for the phone, her pulse quickening slightly. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "Ethan?" Nicole's voice was calm but focused, as she leaned back in her leather chair, her gaze drifting out the window toward the city skyline. "It's done," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "We've finalized the acquisitions for the remaining hotels. You now own every property on that street, except the Crest View." A slow, satisfied smile spread across Nicole's face. "And the Crest View?" Ethan paused, and Nicole could almost hear the faint excitement in his voice. "Max Peterson reached out late last night. He's in trouble, Nicole. Financially, he's cornered. He's agreed to sell, but he's desperate. We can push for a deal at half of the market value, maybe even less." Nicole nodded to herself, feeling a mixture of triumph and relief wash over her. The plan had worked. It had taken weeks of strategic moves, carefully undercutting Max's business, drawing his customers away, and buying up the surrounding properties. But now, she was poised to take over the very hotel that had once humiliated her. "Send him the final offer," Nicole said, her voice firm. "I want this wrapped up quickly. Let's make sure the paperwork is signed and finalized by the end of the week." Ethan hesitated, his tone shifting slightly. "Are you sure you want to go this far? He's already on the verge of collapse. This deal will ruin him." Nicole's fingers tapped lightly on the desk as she considered the question. She had come this far, had spent weeks meticulously planning every step to ensure that Max faced the consequences of his actions. But now that the moment was here, she felt a small twinge of doubt. Would this be enough? Or was she about to cross a line she couldn't return from? "I'm sure," Nicole said after a moment. Her voice was steady, though there was a hint of something deeper, something unresolved. "Understood," Ethan replied. "I'll send him the offer today." As the call ended, Nicole leaned back in her chair, staring at the skyline beyond her window. The city stretched out before her, glittering in the late afternoon sun, a reminder of everything she had built. But beneath the sense of victory, a quiet question lingered in the back of her mind. Was this really justice? Across the street at the Crestview, Max sat alone in his office, his head resting in his hands. The soft glow of the desk lamp was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across the walls. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside. Max had spent the last few days in a haze, barely able to focus as the weight of his failure pressed down on him. The hotel was falling apart. His staff had begun leaving, and the few guests who still trickled in were not enough to keep the business afloat. He had sold off personal assets, dipped into his savings, anything to buy more time, but it wasn't enough. And now he had just received the offer from Nicole Bennett. Half the market value. It was a lowball offer. Insulting, really. But he had no choice. If he didn't sell now, he would lose everything. Max's hands shook as he stared at the contract in front of him. How had it come to this? He had once been the king of this street, the owner of the most prestigious hotel in the city. Now, he was on the verge of losing it all. And it was because of her? Nicole Bennett. Her name echoed in his mind, a bitter reminder of the moment his downfall had begun. He had dismissed her that night, treated her as though she didn't belong in his world, and now she was taking everything from him. The truth was hard to swallow, but Max knew deep down that he had brought this on himself. His arrogance, his prejudice, had blinded him to the reality of the world changing around him. He had clung to the old ways of doing business, exclusive, elitist, and dismissive of anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of belonging. And now he was paying the price. With a heavy sigh, Max picked up the pen, his fingers trembling as he signed the contract. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force, and for the first time in his life, Max felt truly defeated. He had lost. The day Nicole officially took possession of the Crestview was marked by a quiet sense of victory. There were no grand celebrations, no public announcements, just a simple transaction that signaled the end of Max Peterson's reign and the beginning of something new. Nicole stood in the lobby of the newly acquired hotel, her sharp eyes scanning the space. The grand architecture, the gleaming marble floors, the glittering chandeliers, everything about the Crestview exuded old-world luxury. But to Nicole, it also represented the outdated values that had allowed people like Max Peterson to thrive for so long. It was a place where exclusivity had been weaponized, where the guests who didn't fit a certain mold were quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, turned away. But that was about to change. Nicole had big plans for the Crestview. Under her leadership, the hotel would be rebranded and revitalized, its doors opened to a more diverse and inclusive clientele. It would still be a place of luxury, but it would also be a place where everyone, regardless of background, race, or status, would feel welcome. Jason Walker, now officially promoted to general manager, stood beside her. He had been instrumental in turning around the other properties Nicole had acquired, and now he would be overseeing the transformation of the Crestview. "We're calling it the Horizon," Nicole said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "A new name for a new beginning." Jason smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "It's perfect. This place needs a fresh start." Nicole nodded, her gaze drifting over the grand staircase that led to the upper floors. "It's more than just a hotel, it's a statement. We're showing the world that luxury isn't about keeping people out. It's about creating a space where everyone can feel like they belong." As the renovation plans were finalized and the rebranding began, Nicole felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had taken something that had been used to exclude and transformed it into something that would uplift. This was more than just business. It was a personal victory, a victory for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Months passed, and the city continued to change. The Horizon quickly became one of the most popular hotels in the city, known not only for its luxury, but for its welcoming atmosphere. The guests who had once stayed at the Crestview were replaced by a more diverse crowd, people from all walks of life who came to experience the best the city had to offer, without the unspoken barriers that had once defined the space. But while the Horizon thrived, Max Peterson had disappeared from the public eye. After selling the hotel, he had left the city, retreating to a small, quiet town where no one knew his name. The humiliation of losing everything had weighed heavily on him, and for a long time he had wallowed in self-pity and bitterness. But as the months passed, Max found himself reflecting on the choices he had made. The arrogance, the prejudice, it had all led to his downfall. And now, sitting in a modest apartment in a town far removed from the glitz and glamour of his former life, Max began to understand that his actions had consequences. Real, lasting consequences. He had once been a man who believed that success was measured by power and exclusivity. But now, stripped of all that, Max realized that true success was something far deeper. It was about how you treated people, how you carried yourself, and what kind of legacy you left behind. Max didn't know if he would ever find redemption. He wasn't sure if he deserved it. But he did know one thing: he had learned from his mistakes. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to change. One day, as Max sat in a small cafe, sipping his coffee and reading the local newspaper. He overheard a conversation between two patrons at the table next to him. "Have you heard about the Horizon?" one of them said. "It's the old Crestview Hotel. They've completely turned it around. It's all about inclusivity now. Everyone's talking about it." Max's heart sank slightly as he listened to their conversation. The Horizon was everything he had failed to make. The Crestview. And yet, as he sat there, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. Nicole had done what he couldn't. She had taken something broken and made it whole again. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope for him too. The grand opening of the Horizon was an understated affair, just as Nicole Bennett had intended. It wasn't about pomp and circumstance or media attention. It was about the transformation of a place that had once represented exclusivity and elitism into something far greater. A hotel that welcomed everyone. Nicole stood at the entrance of the newly branded hotel, watching as guests streamed in through the doors, their faces filled with excitement and curiosity. The space, now vibrant with warm lighting and contemporary design, felt different. Gone were the cold marble floors and the harsh chandeliers that had once screamed luxury at the expense of comfort. Instead, the Horizon exuded a sense of belonging. It was the kind of place where people could relax, whether they were in business suits or casual attire, where no one would be turned away or judged. Jason Walker, now fully settled into his role as general manager, stood beside Nicole. He had been instrumental in leading the transformation, his experience and leadership making the transition smooth. Nicole admired his calm demeanor, the way he interacted with guests and staff alike, creating an atmosphere of respect and professionalism. "We did it," Jason said, glancing over at her with a smile. Nicole nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We did." The journey to this moment had been long and complicated. There had been moments of doubt, moments when Nicole wondered if she was driven by revenge rather than justice. But standing here now, watching as guests of all backgrounds entered the hotel, she knew that this was about more than just taking down Max Peterson. It was about changing an industry. It was about creating spaces where people felt valued, no matter who they were. As the evening went on, Nicole found herself walking through the lobby, watching the guests interact with the staff. She caught sight of a young black couple checking in at the front desk, their faces bright with excitement. They were greeted with warm smiles and effortless professionalism by the staff, a far cry from the dismissive treatment she had once received at the same hotel. It was a small moment, but it mattered. It was a reminder of why she had fought so hard. Nicole turned toward the large windows that overlooked the city skyline, her reflection blending with the twinkling lights of the buildings beyond. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Sarah Johnson, her trusted assistant, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Everything's running smoothly, Miss Bennett. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." Nicole smiled softly. "That's good to hear." Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You've created something special here, Nicole. It's not just a hotel. It's a vision." Nicole glanced at her, the weight of those words sinking in. Sarah was right. The Horizon was more than just a place to stay. It was a statement that things could be different, that the old ways of doing business weren't the only ways. "Thank you, Sarah," Nicole said, her voice warm. "It couldn't have happened without you and everyone else who believed in this." As Sarah moved on to handle the rest of the evening's details, Nicole stood quietly for a moment, allowing herself to breathe in the accomplishment. She had fought for this, not just for herself, but for the countless others who had been denied a place in spaces like these. She had won. Across the city, in a much quieter part of town, Max Peterson sat at the small kitchen table of his modest apartment. The morning light streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over the worn wooden table. In front of him lay a simple breakfast: coffee, toast, and the morning newspaper. It was a far cry from the lavish spreads he had once enjoyed in his penthouse office at the Crestview, but Max didn't mind. For the first time in months, Max felt a strange sense of contentment. His fall from grace had been swift and brutal. After selling the Crestview, he had left the city, retreating to this quiet town where no one knew his name. At first, he had been angry. Angry at Nicole Bennett, angry at the world, angry at himself. But as the days turned into weeks, Max had been forced to confront the reality of his situation. He had been wrong about everything. He had spent his life building walls, walls around his hotel, walls around himself, keeping out anyone who didn't fit his narrow idea of success. He had built a business that thrived on exclusion, on making people feel as though they had to prove their worth just to walk through the door. And where had it gotten him? Nowhere. Max took a sip of his coffee, staring out the window at the quiet street below. He had learned more in the past few months than he had in all the years he had spent running the Crestview. He had learned that success wasn't about power or prestige. It wasn't about who you could keep out. It was about who you could lift up. He had started working part-time at a small family-owned hotel in town. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was modest, but it was honest work. For the first time, Max found himself working alongside people he might have once dismissed. Cleaning staff, maintenance workers, front desk clerks. And in doing so, he had come to understand the value of every person in the chain, the dignity of hard work, and the importance of treating people with respect. He had once been a man who believed that respect had to be earned, but now he understood that respect was something you gave, freely and without expectation. Max knew he couldn't undo the damage he had caused. He couldn't go back and change the way he had treated Nicole Bennett, or the countless others who had walked through the doors of his hotel only to be met with judgment. But he could do better moving forward. He could be better. A few weeks later, as Nicole sat at her desk, reviewing the latest reports from the horizon, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing slightly when she saw the name, Max Peterson. Nicole hesitated for a moment, surprised. She hadn't heard from Max since the day he had sold the hotel to her, and she hadn't expected to. But something about the message intrigued her, so she opened it. It was a simple message, just a few lines. Nicole, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to thank you. Losing the hotel forced me to see the world differently, and I've learned a lot since then. I'm trying to be a better man. I know I didn't deserve what you gave me that night, the chance to walk away, but I'm grateful for it. Max! Nicole sat back in her chair, reading the message again. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something close. It was acknowledgement. It was growth. For a moment, Nicole considered how she wanted to respond. If she wanted to respond at all. Max had hurt her, and he had hurt others. She didn't owe him anything. But as she thought about everything that had happened, she realized that this wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. She typed a short reply. Max, I'm glad you're learning. That's what matters. Nicole. As she hit send, Nicole felt a sense of closure. It wasn't forgiveness. Not entirely. But it was enough. Months later, the Horizon continued to thrive. Its reputation as a beacon of inclusivity and excellence had spread far beyond the city, drawing guests from all over the country. Jason Walker had become a well-known figure in the industry, his leadership and vision praised by both staff and guests alike. Under his guidance, the Horizon had become a model for what hospitality could be. Nicole stood in her office, gazing out at the bustling street below. The city had changed in many ways, and so had she. The fight she had started months ago wasn't just about taking down one man, it was about redefining an industry. And while there was still work to be done, Nicole knew she had made a lasting impact. She thought about her parents, about the values they had instilled in her, the importance of hard work, dignity, and treating people with respect. They had given her the foundation she needed to succeed, and now she was carrying those values forward, not just in her own life, but in the lives of those who walked through the doors of her hotels. As the sun set on the city, casting a warm golden light over the skyline, Nicole smiled. She had fought for justice. She had won, and she had created something beautiful in the process. The future was bright. Months later, the Horizon continued to thrive. Its reputation as a beacon of inclusivity and excellence had spread far beyond the city, drawing guests from all over the country. Jason Walker had become a well-known figure in the industry, his leadership and vision praised by both staff and guests alike. Under his guidance, the Horizon had become a model for what hospitality could be. Nicole stood in her office, gazing out at the bustling street below. The city had changed in many ways, and so had she. The fight she had started months ago wasn't just about taking down one man, it was about redefining an industry. And while there was still work to be done, Nicole knew she had made a lasting impact. As the sun set on the city, casting a warm golden light over the skyline, Nicole smiled. She had fought for justice. She had won. And she had created something beautiful in the process. The future was bright. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through Nicole's story. If this story inspired you, made you think, or just gave you a moment of escape, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more stories just like this one. Your support helps us continue creating narratives that matter. And if you loved Nicole's journey of transformation, I've got another story that's right up your alley. Click here to check it out. You won't want to miss what happens next. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more inspiring, powerful stories.